Judith, well, what can I say? Judith has been a leading member of this board since its inception, representing West Yorkshire, and has made an enormous contribution to moving forward the Northern renewal agenda across the whole of the North, and then, of course, her particular responsibilities for that great city of Leeds. She certainly provided lots of transformational input into the role of this board, taking us forward, for example, with the Northern Transport Charter, and has always provided me as chair with extremely wise advice and counsel. So I'm sure you would all wish to join me in thanking Judith for those 5 years of absolutely outstanding service. And the only thing that sweetens the pill, Judith, of us losing you is that we are going to have, I know, an outstanding advocate for the North of England and all the things we want to achieve in the North of England in your new and very exciting role in the House of Lords. So, Judith, is there anything you would like to say?
Well, first of all, John, thank you very much for those very kind words. And I have to say, when I started off on this journey many years ago, actually, before Transport for the North was actually established, working way back with the Northern Way with John Prescott, and just really recognising what an incredible contribution the North had to make in terms of rebalancing the economy of the country. Way back then, I don't think I ever realised there was so much to know, particularly about rail and trains. And it has become quite a passion for me, and will continue to be so, as you quite rightly say. And I hope that you will all continue to use me as a resource, as an advocate, and I'll be watching your progress with enormous interest. And I just want to say, I think Transport for the North is an incredibly important body, and we need all of us to really make sure that we enhance its role, recognise just how important it is to have the voice of everyone right across the North coming together and working to further our real objectives in terms of progressing all of the infrastructure spend that we know needs to happen, and it's urgent and we need to get on with it. But thank you, John, and I look forward to continuing our relationship when I am in my seat in the House of Lords. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm only sorry that we can't have a physical meeting to wish you well, and I'm conscious that we could have a wide range of members who would wish to say things. I've seen one or two comments, Andy and Nick Forbes amongst others, on the chat bar, but it's very difficult in a virtual meeting with such a large assembly to do justice to the importance of this occasion. But as you've rightly said, Judith, it is the end of one era, but the beginning of another, and we look forward to continuing to work with you in your leadership role. So thank you very much. Why don't we give Judith at least a virtual round of applause? Okay, thank you very much. And here's to easier times when we can raise a glass of wine with you, Judith. Okay, can I then move to item 2, any declarations of interest? Thank you very much, colleagues. Let me then move to item 3, which are the minutes of our meeting on the 14th of January. First of all, can I just check for accuracy? And then can I ask for any matters arising not covered on the agenda? Just for our due record, of course, we spent a lot of time at the last meeting discussing the rail needs assessment, and the Chief Executive, in consultation with board members, sent our strong views on that matter, and those were discussed with the Secretary of State and Andrew Stevenson on a meeting on the 3rd of February, and we had a board call to debrief you on the 4th of February, and of course relevant matters are on this agenda. Similarly, I think there is a follow-up meeting with a number of TFN board members with Andrew Stevenson next week on both Tuesday and Wednesday, which they promised as a follow-up. And in addition, the Chief Executive, Barry, sent an equally effective letter pursuing the board's mandate on road matters, on the Trans-Pennine Tunnel and the Yorkshire Cross-Pennine route. And in relation to the decision to pursue the CEO appointment, I can say that the applications have now closed. We have had a good response to the advert, and we have a meeting, as some of you will know, of the appointments panel tomorrow to start the sift. So those were the matters arising that aren't otherwise on the agenda. Anything else before we move on? Thank you very much, colleagues. Let me move then to item 4, which is the IST programme, which is clearly dealing with just the sad and inevitable consequences of the fact there isn't funding to move through phase 3 of the IST programme. But can I start this item by a really big thank you to the TFN staff in the IST team who have worked so effectively to bring forward to full successful fruition phases 1 and phases 2 of our IST programme. And we should bank those real achievements, because those have made the lives of travelling public in the north of England easier and more up to date and modern. It's only a pity we can't carry on with phase 3. But we have some governance matters to deal with now, to do with the closure of the programme. So I'm going to hand over to our director, Jeremy Acklam, to take us through the paper. Obviously, we've read it, Jeremy. It's what you want us to focus on and what you need us to agree. Jeremy.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and thank you very much for that vote of thanks. So clearly members will be aware that the IST programme was created to improve the passenger experience across the north, and with our phase 1 we achieved that with an 80% adoption of smart rail season ticket holders prior to the COVID pandemic. And we went on to deliver the flexi season capability across a large swathe of the North Rail network, featuring rail products that were more focused on less frequent commuter traffic, an essential part of a post-COVID recovery. And of course, we had focused that on what we were going to be doing next, as well as in the second phase, delivering the disruption information system for bus, light rail and ferry, which is now being made available through third-party companies like MoveIt and CityMapper and soon to be Google. So those aspects were brought together in the proposal that we made to the Department for Transport for spending review. And we were unfortunate to say that we have not yet been able to secure any of that £33 million funding. So in the DfT's funding settlement letter of the 4th of January 2021, where it indicated that no further funding was going to be made available for the continuation of the integrated and smart travel programme, the DfT stated that contactless on rail, for instance, would be delivered by through the rail reform programme, with DfT considering cost-effective delivery models and funding streams to roll out pay-as-you-go to urban and regional commuter areas as part of their rail reforms. So we clearly, we don't know what those are yet, and but we do know that we have not got the funding to take that forward. We have approached DfT on a number of angles to secure some funding, even small funding to go forward to look at particular opportunities. But as yet, I'm afraid to say that there has been no funding secured. And therefore, unfortunately, this paper seeks the board's agreement to wind down the programme. Clearly, if the IST programme is closed, the proposed extensions to phase 1 and phase 2, together with phases 3 and 4, and the phases 5 and 6 that we had proposed as part of the spending review submission for the digitisation of transport across the whole of the North, will not go ahead. And of course, some partners are going to be unable to deliver their smart capability as planned, because their smart aspirations were largely captured within the TfN spending review submission. IST closure will also impact the return of customers to public transport in the short term and the speed of exit from emergency measures in the medium term. And we will be working on potential solutions to allow continued interface to Rail Delivery Group, DfT and other parties associated with smart travel. And we will be bringing those post-closure options to you at the March board. And that will include, at that point, a recommended approach. So for today, I need to recommend to the board that it notes cessation of funding for the IST programme, that it agrees to the winding down of the IST programme, noting that a closure plan is being finalised, that it notes the winding down process will continue into 21 and 22, and that DfT will provide funding to cover the cost of that winding down programme, and to note that the business plan paper to the March board will set out any proposal to retain an IST capability funded from TfN's core budget. Now, I am, of course, Chairman, very happy to take any questions that anyone may have prior to taking that recommendation forward.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thanks for all you've been doing on this very important work. So I'm going to come first to Dan Jarvis, and after Dan's spoken, I'm going to come to Nick Forbes and then to Darren Hale. Dan first.
Thank you, Chair. The closure of the IST programme will have an impact on our plans here in South Yorkshire to improve the experience of passengers in our area. And that's happening just at the very time that we need to be investing in the network. So it is extremely disappointing that dialogue with government has not produced a solution. It is concerning that we've not been able to secure funding for proposals to support flexible ticketing options. As over the coming months, we do need to be doing everything that we possibly can to attract people back onto public transport. So it is very much my hope that the DfT will review their position on this, but also that through the business planning process, we look at whether we can retain some resources within TfN to continue the work on this important agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and we'll be picking those points up, of course, as Jeremy said, in the proposals we bring on the business plan to the March meeting, seeing what we can possibly do. So I'll now come to Nick, and then to Darren, and then to Michael Green.
Thank you, John. And I think, like all members, I share a real sense of disappointment that this has been cut from our programme, as Dan says, at a time when we need to be attracting more people onto public transport. And in fact, that's not only critical in terms of getting our economy back on the move, it's also essential from an air quality and a climate change point of view if we're serious about making changes to how people move around. And it also feels odd that government would do this in one hand and invest in new rail capacity on the other hand. The Newcastle Northumberland line, which there was an announcement about a few weeks ago, won't be integrated into our metro system, won't be integrated into the wider rail network, and you won't be able to do transfers onto different modes of transport either. That feels to me a huge lost opportunity. And I guess my question is not, can we continue to lobby Department for Transport, because I know we've done a lot of that, but whether there is any scope for lobbying the Treasury for an announcement in the budget, and whether there's anything we can do to ask the Chancellor to look at this. And in those circumstances, given that the budget's only a few weeks away, is it possible or realistic to put on hold the implementation of the recommendations until we've got a definitive answer ahead of that fiscal event?
So I'll certainly, Nick, ask Jeremy when we've had a collection of member input to come back on that very important point. And I agree with you. My understanding is DFT did not receive Treasury funding. So you're absolutely right that the Treasury is where the support needs to come from. Darren, please.
Yeah, I concur with the comments of my two colleagues. I don't need to repeat them. But what I was I had raised before here, John, was the issue is certainly from a whole perspective, we saw IST as an important bridge to resolving some of those issues about differential pricing structures across the network, because vis-a-vis the former PTE areas and the non-PTE areas, because as you know, John, we've had this conversation. The cost of travelling a mile in East Yorkshire and Hull, from Hull and East Yorkshire, is a lot more than the cost of, is priced a lot higher than travelling a mile in West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire because of those historical differences. And I'm just worried about where that debate gets lost now with the closing down of IST, because IST we saw as a bridge to that, and I'm worried about if we're serious about One North, and I know that doesn't just affect Hull and East Yorkshire, that affects other areas of the North as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll now come to Michael Green and then Judith Blake.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. With regard to the IST team, I think my thoughts in particular are on the individuals affected, and let's hope that they secure opportunities moving forwards to put their skills and knowledge to good use. But I'm obviously concerned that team has built up a strong knowledge base moving forwards, which is invaluable across the north of England. And I'm just wondering whether there's some way moving forwards that we can look at retaining some of that knowledge within the north, which may help us all moving forwards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I think we'll come back to personnel issues when we come to item 5 on the agenda. But your point, Michael, about all our thoughts being with affected staff is incredibly important and very well taken, I'm sure. Judith.
Thank you. And can I echo the thoughts and thanks to the team who put so much work into this. And quite honestly, it was one of our main priorities when we started on this journey, really recognising the difference it makes to anyone who is considering changing from dependency on a private car, that they have a really simple way of moving around. And all of the examples we've had of the numerous different companies and tickets that people have to navigate to go on quite a relatively simple journey in the north is such a deterrent for so many people. I think particularly I'm disappointed that there's no way forward to break it down into smaller pilot projects, and that's certainly from a West Yorkshire perspective. We were really hoping that we could bring all of the experience that we've gained and really starting to make some breakthroughs with some of the bus companies. And I understand that some of the private companies weren't as receptive in different parts of the north, and I think it could be really worth pursuing that. Also, when Williams does finally see the light of day, I understand that ticketing and fares will be part of that report. But it can't just be about rail. The whole point of what we were trying to do is the integration with bus. Now, I just understand that other parts of the country are equally frustrated around this. I'm thinking of Midlands Connect. It might be worth joining forces with them and making our views really clear to Treasury in particular. Of just what a missed opportunity we really think this is, and particularly linking with the economic recovery and just how important public transport is going to be, that perhaps we could join forces or certainly find a way of expressing all the views that we've heard so far today, our real disappointments, our real desire to find a way of moving this forward, and a real belief that it can be done if the will is there. But if we could make our views felt to Treasury, if the board supports that, I think it would be a really good outcome from this discussion. Thank
you, Judith, and that's very timely, because I know that Barry has an active and open line of representations at the moment on our issues of concern with the Treasury, because he and I have recognised the real need for our views to be clearly heard directly in the Treasury, and that is proceeding. So that's something we can pick up on. And I think there's a very similar comment linked also to the decarbonisation agenda and the relevance of this to decarbonisation from Councillor Paul Haslam on the chat bar. So all of those points I think resonate. Let me at this point then come back to Jeremy. And Jeremy, feel free to comment on any of the points you feel you need to, but perhaps particularly Nick Forbes' comment about what responsibilities we have and any discretion we have to flex how we close down the programme.
Yes, thank you, Chen. Firstly, thank you all for your support on behalf of myself and the IST team. We have been working very closely with your teams to try and get around the issues that we're currently facing, and may I echo Mayor Jarvis's view. It is extremely disappointing because we had in fact quite significantly turned around the approach that we were making to be very focused on digitization. It is the future of modal change. It is strongly required as part of the incentivization for people to move back to public transport and green transport and healthy transport post-COVID, as mentioned by Councillor Blake. And that making a difference is very much where we were focused. So in taking the overall position forward, we are very much focused on seeing what we can do coming forward, and we'll bring forward proposals to the March board around the ability to continue the overall bridge between the different parties across the whole of the North. As Councillor Hale mentioned, and in particular looking on how we can share and maintain the knowledge across all of the parties, as Councillor Green raised as well. The question then is whether we can do any of that in the short term. So we have obviously looked at what we need to do in regards to our current funding, and our current funding envelope runs until the end of March. Now, within that envelope, we are able to obviously continue to work with colleagues around the table to make sure that we can do what we can. But at this point in time, there isn't any flexibility within the current funding envelope to extend that beyond March, other than for closed down activity. So although we can certainly look at that from the point of view of whether DFT is willing to change its viewpoint and make additional funding available. Unfortunately, that isn't currently the position. And so the position that's presented in this paper is if you like, the formal position that we find ourselves in. That is the only one that is presently on the table. Taking forward discussions with Treasury, I think, is certainly something that we will do with yourself, Chairman, and with Barry. And I think there is an opportunity certainly to work together with the likes of Midlands Connect, where we have indeed been having some discussions with them, and see if we can bring together a more rounded approach to regional transportation in England. So I can't promise anything, but we have been working very strongly to try and get this decision changed. We'll continue to do so. We will continue to look for your support in doing that as well. Obviously, we will take forward whatever we can with flexibility in the remaining months of this financial year.
Thank you, Jeremy. I wanted to bring Jeremy in because there's been such a rich series of comments. If you take too many comments in one basket, it's very hard to capture them all and give them the response they need. There are several other people I know still interested. So Mark on the chat bar is reminding us of the very important link that this has to working patterns and changing working patterns, which is a key point. And Karen Shaw, I think you also had your hand up and I did see it. So please, Karen, would you like to say something?
Chair, I think the points have been made by my colleagues now. We've moved on, but I was just checking there wasn't any technical glitch because I have had an upgrade. So
No,
thank you.
Karen, and thanks for your interest and your support on these points. Ben Smith from the department.
Chair, thank you very much. John, I'd just like to, if I can, make a couple of points from the department's perspective, if that's okay. Firstly, just completely recognise the disappointment that the lack of continued funding for integrated and smart ticketing has for board members. I do completely understand that, and to thank all members and indeed TFN for the work that has been done to date on smart ticketing. Much of which has been very successful. So thank you for that. Just to let you know, a couple of things that are coming down the track, which may help in some regards with the future of this important topic and this work. The first of which is to mention that obviously the spending review last year, which was the spending review which did not make funding available for the continuation of this work, did for the most part only cover 1 year. So we are working to an expectation in the department that there will be another spending review at some point this year. I don't know if that will happen or when it will happen, but that's the expectation we're working to. So there will obviously be opportunities to think about how we take forward smart ticketing across the whole of the country, including in the north, as we go into that process. Secondly, the national bus strategy, which we're finalising at the moment, will outline the department's vision for information, ticketing and technology on buses moving forward, and obviously that will cover the north of England as well. And finally, just to mention, I'm sure many board members will be aware that the government announced the £4.2 billion intra-city transport, public transport fund, last year, which will make that sum of money available across 5 years for investing in transport in 8 of England's major city regions, many of them in the north. So, of course, recognising that smart ticketing firstly happens at a local level, there will be the potential for individual places to consider whether they could make use of that fund to support some of this work going forward as well.
Thank you very much, Ben. And can I reiterate the point I made at the last meeting, which is where I think Dan Jarvis started off this very helpful conversation, that whilst, of course, what we have in TFN's own staff capability, I think is very precious, as Nick Forbes has said, moving forward, this was very much about developments within individual city regions. So can I continue to ask the department to be as lateral as it possibly can be in looking at ways in which it can support the legitimate aspirations of city regions to develop this work in their own localities? The more we can do, the better. Now, I'm going to now move to put the resolution in paragraph 7.1 to the board. I'm going to flex the resolution slightly to reflect the mandate that's coming out of this board. So coming back, Nick, to the many points, helpful points you've made, Nick Forbes this is, and the points you've made on chat bar. Nick is saying that surely, notwithstanding Jeremy's answer, we should seek to make one more push with the Treasury, given the budget is only a couple of weeks away, before taking precipitous action on the team. I think that has to be balanced, colleagues, with our legal duties. Clearly, we have to run a balanced budget, and as Jeremy has already said, the only funding we have that goes from the beginning of April are wind down costs. So I think we cannot avoid putting the resolution to the committee in order that we are compliant with our fiduciary duties. But Nick, I'm proposing to put that resolution to the committee in the context that Barry and Jeremy will make best efforts with the Treasury during the remaining time in the run-up to the budget. I think, honestly, Nick, that's the best I can do. I can't postpone the resolution because clearly we have fiduciary duties and a duty of care to the staff involved, as well as an aspiration to keep them on board and do our best. Can I just check with Nick that if I phrase the resolution, this is Nick Forbes, resolution in that way, that is the best way to proceed?
Completely understand that, John, and I'm certainly not trying to be obstructive in terms of our appropriate governance around the implementation of these decisions. I just think, as have been rehearsed, if there is a final push that we could make, perhaps with some other transport lobbying bodies, to Treasury ahead of the budget, that does at least give us one final go at trying to get them to change their minds. And if they don't, and we will know well in advance, I think, of the actual budget anyway, then sadly, I fully understand we'll have to press ahead with the recommendations and their implementation.
Obstruction wasn't in my mind, Nick, never with your good self. It was simply trying to embrace your thought, where I know you're representing so many contributors from the board, whilst also making sure we have the necessary, sad but necessary governance. So thank you for your support for how I phrased it. So in that context, I'm putting 7.1 in the paper to the board. We note the cessation of funding, and with reluctance, we agree the appropriate wind down steps. More proposals will come in the March business plan paper on what we can do next on IST within the funding we have, and we will make one final push with the Treasury. On that basis, is the paper approved? Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, one of the challenges I think we have, one of the challenges we have today is there's just so much rich business that is of great significance to the North that we have to get through, but we do have a hard finish at 3 o'clock. I felt it was very important to let that discussion run because of the huge commitment we've made to IST, but we will need to be quite succinct in covering some of the remaining business if we are to get through the very important items we have for a 3 o'clock finish. So can I ask for forbearance, and particularly, sadly, as ever, I'm saying to staff leads, please take the paper as read. There's no need to present the paper. You just need to highlight whether there's a particular point you need the board to focus on, because that will make sure we get as many member contributions from board members and get a strong mandate. So I'm just checking the chat bar. Yeah, okay, I think we've picked up key point there from Mark. Thank you very much. We now move to item 5, which is the funding update and draft business planning. Now, this is an interim item because this is a decision-making item at the March board, so we should be able to save a little bit of time, but it's very important we're aware of what's going on. I'll come first to Ian Craven, and then I know Barry needs to make a contribution. Ian.
Thank you, John. So I wasn't going to go through the report in detail, but I will provide a brief update on developments since the report was submitted on the 10th, and then I'll hand on to Barry and then Tim. So since this report was submitted, we're continuing to undertake an iterative process of business planning. It's well advanced, but the intention is that the programme, operational and support team plans will all be completed by the 5th of March in time for them to be brought into a single document for presentation to the board on the 16th. In parallel with that exercise, we've been developing a draft budget for 21-22, and we've completed a final re-estimate of this financial year. That reforecast through to 2021 has identified some more slippage of forecast activity. Now, this is largely due to ongoing uncertainty. The current environment is obviously still creating a drag on activity. It's also related to the ongoing effects of COVID-19, because quite a lot of the slippage that's included was for external costs in terms of returning to the office, office reorganisations and the like, in order to make everything COVID compliant. So those costs are still going to land. The intention per paragraph 3.6 of this report, therefore, is to carry forward that activity and associated funding into 2021. That will have the effect of increasing the budget envelope that's proposed in paragraph 311 from 8 to 8.6 million. Unfortunately, as we've already heard, we're not able to report any change in the funding position to IST. For IST, as advised to members in the previous report, there will be proposals brought forward in the March paper as to how we retain capability and capacity within the of IST within the overall corporate entity of TFN. Finally, I'd just like to draw attention to the continued uncertainty around the IRP and the potential impact that has on the NPR business planning. We have based our business planning assumptions that we already have on the basis that there will be uncertainty in the first couple of quarters of the next financial year, but there is clearly a potential for the IRP to have consequential impacts both on the NPR business plan that we're putting forward, but also on TFN more broadly. I think I'll leave it there, John. But I think Barry, I'll hand on to Barry before Tim picks up.
Barry. So Barry, you may be on mute, I think.
My big moment. Thank you, Ian. And I just wanted to especially emphasise to the board Ian's excellent work with the department in agreeing some cost allocations, which has significantly mitigated elements of the funding cut. So actually, we're in a much better, substantially better outlook than when we last spoke. And against that backdrop, I just wanted to comment on the letter that we and I believe all board members received from Unison, and they set out 3 principles, principal points, namely voluntary redundancy, redeployment and external vacancy freeze. And we will, of course, consider, as we work through our business planning process, we'll consider those and keep Unison and the workforce fully appraised. In relation to the specific question raised to me about the chief executive recruitment, Unison raised that in terms of the external vacancy freeze. My intention would be to reply to Unison that TFN intend to continue with the recruitment process as already agreed by the January board. And that January board, the financial outlook was substantially worse than it is now. But it'd be really helpful if the board confirmed their view on that point today before I write back to Unison. Tim, is there any particular points you want to bring out on the business plan, or are we happy to open up to questions?
I think we can open it up to questions, Barry.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, so any points any members wish to make, please? Andy Burnham and then Michael Green.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I don't intend to delay the board for long, but it was just to pass a comment on the letter from Unison, much of which I think is very reasonable, and I would certainly support a voluntary approach, Chair, to any redundancy, and every possible effort made to avoid compulsory redundancy. We want to see TFN staff treated fairly. I can absolutely understand the point about a vacancy freeze, and I think that should apply across the organisation so that people at risk of redundancy might be able to move to a different part of the organisation, because obviously sometimes that doesn't happen if there's a recruitment happening in other parts of the organisation. So I would support Unison in saying that, although the only caveat, to just confirm what Barry said, I don't think that can possibly apply to the chief executive position at this particular moment in time. It's critical that this organisation has strong leadership. Barry's provided that, but we obviously want that to continue through his successor. To leave the organisation without a chief executive at this time, I think would be, well, we would be letting down the North if we did that, because it wouldn't provide the clear direction that the organisation is going to need. So it was just to offer that comment, John, on the Unison letter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, the board welcomes the from the recognised trade union, so that's much appreciated. Michael Green, and then I think Karen. I think I saw your hand. Feel free to comment if you wish. So Michael first, and then Karen Shaw.
Thanks, Chairman. I'd just like to express concern regarding the comments in paragraph 4.26, which is on the new page 33, particularly the risk to the proactive support on local scheme development and assistance in securing funding from the DFT. And I think it's critically important that we can ensure that local partners are still able to tap into the extensive knowledge base that we've gathered at TFN over the years. And I think if that was taken away, it will be a significant gap moving forward.
Thank you. Point well made and noted, Michael. See you on the chat bar as well. Feel free to comment. No, I think we possibly picked up Karen's point on the chat bar, which was supporting Andy's comment. So we obviously had a good crack at this at the last meeting, and we'll have a good crack at it when we have formal proposals at the next board meeting. Clearly, this is not a happy situation, but some progress has been made since the last meeting. As Ian and Barry have both said, we have been able to reallocate some costs which have reduced the impact, still significant, but have reduced the impact compared to the one we last discussed, leaving, of course, aside our disappointments on IST, which we've already discussed. So on that basis, I put paragraph 7.1 to the board, which is approving the proposed funding envelope, which has now risen with carry forward to 8.6, noting that that is partially through use of reserves, looking at the priorities that have come out of the member working group, and the fact that we would confirm IPBA support contract as part of taking forward the work on the Northern Transport Charter. And this is about appraisal work for our research, which is Tim's area. And we approve, therefore, the recommendations in paragraph 7.1 and look forward to Ian's budget and Tim's business plan for the March meeting. Do I have the support of the board? Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much. We now move on then to item 6, which are urgent items, and it's helpful that this item was put on the agenda because we have actually got some urgent items. I've got 3, in fact, so which I'm going to take 6A, 6B and 6C. The good news is we'll take 6A and 6B together because they are the 2 papers on the SOC timing issue. So I'll ask Barry to comment on those, and then after we have debated the SOC timing issue, 6C is the corporate risk register, which will be back with Ian. So SOC timing, 2 items together, 2 papers on 1 issue. Barry White, please.
Thank you, John. Firstly, I'd like to apologise to members for the need for a supplemental report. I think that's the first time in 3 years that I can remember that we've needed to issue a supplemental report. But also, with hindsight, I wish we'd briefly held off issuing the initial paper, as I actually believe with more work last week, both in amending the paper and additional dialogue with DFT, we could have had a single paper on this item in the public domain at the end of last week, rather than 2 papers last night. Moving on to the substance, the government have expressed their wish to rephase the strategic outline case until after the integrated rail plan is published. And I want to give some context for that. Chris Grayling, in his letter to us on the 10th of April 2019, after receiving our SOBC, said, "I look forward to receiving the revised business case with a single preferred network and a phasing profile." Now, actually, we're not yet at a single preferred network, and some of the IRP work could help resolve some of those single network issues. And the current Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, wrote to us on the 2nd of December, after we gave our advice on our preferred way forward after the November board meeting, saying, "It seems to me that regardless of when the IRP publishes, it would be helpful that it precedes the submission of the NPR strategic outline case to government." And the co-clienting approach that we adopt with DFT yields significant benefits for the North. However, DFT have an additional role as funder, which does provide them with additional authority and responsibility over certain matters, which I would say isn't unusual in projects of this scale. Now, in response to the request from DFT, I asked our team to look at the options available, and as set out in the supplemental report, the view very much is the only practical way forward is to agree to a rephasing of the strategic outline case. And what the paper tries to set out is what is the impact of that rephasing? Will it delay construction starting? Not necessarily. In some cases, it could allow quicker progress. It really depends on what the IRP says. Does it affect the status of the preferred way forward that we will consider later today? And the answer is no. We can still express that in statutory advice to the Secretary of State. And even if we were submitting the SOC in March, we would have accompanied that with that statutory advice as well. The integrated rail plan will also allow a greater understanding of the government's plans for HS2 and how that might integrate on NPR. But it does create a degree of uncertainty in our business planning. That's highlighted by Ian in the business planning item. So there's a clear recommendation to accept that rephasing of the strategic outline case. And really the key is in this all is what will the integrated rail plan actually say? When will it be published? And the paper also sets out that we can include our views in some of the recommendations in the supplemental paper with a statutory advice to accompany the statutory advice on the preferred way forward as well. So by way of introduction in paper, John, that's it. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. So let's take some comments. I see Hans Mundry's hand up. Hans.
Yes, thanks, John. I understand the rationale and reasoning behind this move, but it does seem like we're sort of being silenced in a way. I've got some concerns that we're going to be told what our views are and then asked to put our thoughts in after the event, which is a bit concerning, because I think we should be leading and putting our views forward first and having them debated. It seems it's the wrong way round for me, and we're going to be given a completed document of circumstances and us to comment on somebody else's work rather than us producing our work and then commenting and then that being commented on. So I've got some concerns that we're sort of being silenced and we're going to end up with a completed document route put in front of us and then us to comment and tweet that rather than the other way around. It seems like it's going the wrong way round for me.
Thank you, Hans. Steve Rotherham, please, and then I'll come to Dan Jarvis. Steve.
Thanks, Chairs. A similar sort of point. It's about the sequencing, isn't it? And our SOC should be informing the IRP and not the other way around. Otherwise, we've got a fait accompli of which perhaps we may well be able to tweak some things, as Hans put it. And I did notice that Barry was reading quite carefully from the script, and it was a script that I could have heard a departmental official reading out. And what I think we need to do is to look at both of the options. Barry didn't give us the alternative to what is being proposed, and that is that we try here to see whether we can make a decision to put forward our SOC. Now, if we do, the question is, Chair, to yourself and to Barry, would that be accepted? Because my understanding is that if we make that decision today, the department will reject any decision by us to continue with the timeline that we've got of putting our SOC first before the IRP is published.
Thank you. I'll come back, Steve, on those very telling points. Let's just collect a basket of comments, but thank you for that. Dan.
Thank you, Chair. I share the concerns that have been articulated by Hans and Steve. I just wanted to make a sort of slightly broader point, and that's that I would like us to seek assurances about the need for ongoing engagement with government on the development of the integrated rail plan, and actually continue to make the case for the vital role that I think that TfN have to play in the development of that important piece of work. Where we can make early progress, we should be seeking a mandate for TfN to press on. In fact, I think it would be for the government to explain why, in the current circumstances, we wouldn't proceed on that basis. I am hopeful that the government's IRP uses the work that we're doing as the very foundation for the work that it's doing. But like many others, I suspect, I'm in the dark as to the contents, and I haven't felt, if I'm honest, the same sense of joint endeavour that has underpinned the co-clienting arrangements for the NPR work. So our starting point on NPR was that we work with the government to ensure that Northern priorities are delivered by Northern leaders, working with a wide range of partners to benefit our communities here in the North. So I think the government needs to ensure that this devolved approach characterises the delivery phase.
Thank you very much. Darren Hale, I think.
Yeah, I think following on from Dan and Steve's points there, John, it's almost the big issue is where are we going to be listened to, isn't it really? And will they take account of the work that's gone into the SOC? Because I can't see a point of us submitting it if it's just going to go in the bin and not be read anyway. But at the same time, I want some sort of reassurance that the collective voice of the North, which is around this table today, is given due respect and taken account of, because that, as was proved, in the timetable fiasco, sometimes they don't know best, and we have a vital input to make. And I think it's really important that that's not lost on them, and that we get some assurances about the voice and the role of this body in those discussions and in that infrastructure improvement going forward.
Okay, I'd quite like to hear from some LEP members. I think that would be important to the debate, but I'm going to come first to Andy Burnham and then to Judith Blake. Andy.
Well, thank you, Chair. I just want to support comments that have already been made by colleagues, but just to also link it to the previous discussion today with regard to the budget of this organisation and the downgrading of some of our ambitions around ticketing. We're hitting a point now where big decisions are in front of us that will define the north of England for the rest of this century and indeed the one after it. It's that serious. But when we look at what's happening to TfN, it feels as though our voice is being sort of marginalised just at the critical moment, and our ambitions are being downgraded at the same time. So I think it's worrying to say that we go quiet at this point and we wait for the IRP. We've already been told that the IRP is predicated. Certainly, the advice given by the NIC was that it was predicated on fully funding high-speed rail in the south, and the way that the budget reductions would be made would be by cutting back in the north. So that's the age-old story, isn't it? That's what TfN was set up to challenge. The idea that we always get a cut-price railway in the north and a fully funded railway elsewhere in the country. So I find it very hard to sort of just almost say, well, we wait now and we sit back and we don't do anything, Chair. I think we're being in danger of being sidelined at the worst possible moment, as Hans Mundry said. It feels as though the department is slowly turning down the volume on the TfN voice and almost possibly getting ready to pull the plug. Well, I just don't think we can accept that. I was looking back actually at George Osborne's speech in 2014 when he launched the Northern Powerhouse. He said, we need to think big, we need an ambitious plan to make the cities and towns here in the north radically more connected from east to west. I mean, that was at the heart of this, and it feels as though the ambition is sort of draining out of this project, and so is the northern voice. And the ambition for the north and the voice for the north were absolutely at the heart of what we were promised. And my feeling at the moment, John, is we've got to wake up to what's happening. We've just been discussing the sort of the loss of capability of this organisation with some of the budget situation it finds itself in, and I would feel very uncomfortable just sort of drifting into a fait accompli situation where we see our ambitions downgraded without us having challenged that in any way. And I don't think people will forgive us in the north if we sit here as a board and let that happen. We have to be the guardians of the ambitions of the communities across the north for a much better 21st century rail network. And at this point, this is not the point to go quiet, given that everything else that is happening to TfN right now.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for that support for TfN. I'm going to come to Judith and then Peter Kennan and then Taylor Kisher so that we get some LEP input. But at that point, allow me then, after those three contributions, to come back and have a go at addressing Steve's very pertinent question. So Judith first.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to add my voice and my support to the comments that have been made. And I think we need to get across that we are here as individual leaders, representatives, but we actually represent the voices of many stakeholders in our areas. So in my case, I reflect West Yorkshire leaders, but all of our consultation about our ambition for transport, which is the underpinning elements of our recovery plans, of our economic aspirations. We've gone out to seek views, to get support from chambers of commerce, from business representatives, so many different stakeholders. And I have to say that all of them are coming together and just really can't understand why we are not able to express very strongly the conclusions that we have reached through those processes. And we all, as board members, have a responsibility to go back to those stakeholders and explain our actions and how we are promoting the aspirations of so many different interests. We cannot explain why we wouldn't be expressing those views at this critically important time in moving towards achieving our ambitions. I think what we have demonstrated through Transport for the North is that we are quite capable of coming together, working through complex and sometimes competing priorities, and that we have come up with a very strong long-term vision. And I think that's the responsibility of Transport for the North, to have that longer term vision that isn't subjected to difference of opinions in government, different points of view, changes of maybe political control. It is that absolutely rooted vision in the aspirations and ambition for the North. I don't believe we can stay quiet on this. And if our ambition and aspiration can't be met, then it's up to government to justify that and explain it to us, so that we can then go back and explain to the people that we represent on this board of why things aren't moving forward perhaps in the way we wanted. Maybe the government is agreeing with our vision, but it's very important for us that we're able to articulate what that is in a way that is so supportive of the work that TFN has been doing in bringing so many different voices together.
As you say, Judith, I often illustrate this with the Strategic Transport Plan, which I think is one of the documents I'm proudest of, because I didn't write it myself. So I'm proudest of being associated with, because whenever I'm with the government minister or indeed a journalist, I describe that as a Bible for investment in the North over the next 30 years, irrespective of who's in government and which parliament we're talking about. And actually that's a Bible for a 30-year period that could affect 6 parliaments and 6 governments. And they can draw as able to get those investments across the line. And of course, we'll keep that plan up to date. I think if Peter will just bear with me 1 second, it might be helpful if I just respond to Steve's question. And then I've got Peter Kennan, Taylor Fisher, I've got Mark, I've got Karen. I'll bring all of them in just a moment. In terms of where we are on the options, clearly, if I think of where we've got to on Northern Powerhouse Rail and Tim and his team's excellent work, there are 2 big corridors where there are very significant capital investments. I'm thinking of the Leeds to Manchester corridor and the very important link with Bradford. And I'm thinking of the Manchester to Liverpool corridor and the very important link with Warrington, where there are choices that will have to be made with government in order to get the best transformational ambition for the North. Those are probably the 2 negotiations which will need to proceed between us and central government in order to, I'm not in any way underestimating the important issues for Sheffield, the important issues for Hull, the important issues for Newcastle and Teesside, but I'm just illustrating 2 areas where if you look at the scale of the investment, there are very big choices to be made. And those choices will ultimately be flushed out, probably not round the TFN board table, frankly. They'll be flushed out between ministers of the Crown and elected northern leaders in their respective city regions. And the question is when that will be done. The SOC will be stronger, in my judgment and Barry's judgment, if we are able to get to a point where we have agreement or we understand the disagreement on ambition on those 2 corridors and the other issues which are also important. If we've actually reduced to 1 preferred option in each of those corridors and rolled out some of the options which frankly don't deliver for the north of England, that is the prize. Now, if by waiting for a bit more news from government, from the heart of government, from the top of government, it actually helps that process, then that could be positive. But of course, I understand the concerns of those who think it could be negative. And as someone who spent 5 years trying to get this Arrowhead project of Northern Powerhouse Rail across the line, you can imagine how frustrated and disappointed I am if there is a delay. So that, I think, is the issue. Is it a positive opportunity or is it not a positive opportunity? And then, Steve, just on process, I think I just need to remind you, and it is frustrating for all of us, but in this co-cliented programme, the SOC itself can only proceed by joint agreement. And that was the point of the supplementary paper, Steve, about options 2 and options 3 in the original paper, that actually our monitoring officer, our legal advice is that we cannot proceed unilaterally. What we can do ourselves is provide statutory advice. So the SOC needs to be jointly agreed because it's a co-cliented programme. But we, of course, can put in our advice. And let me just remind you, when I pushed very hard as chairman at the September meeting and the November meeting to get our preferred route and our preferred phasing options agreed, and some colleagues were concerned we were agreeing this before we saw the whole picture. My big concern was to get that advice into ministers while the IRP was still fluid. So we have not missed the opportunity, and we have another opportunity today to get that advice across. Now, I'm going to come back to those who've had their hands up and then bring you in as well, Steve. So if we just ask people to be as succinct as possible, starting with Peter Kennan.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to just echo the previous comments. Business, academic institutions and all sections of society are saying, why aren't you going with your SOC to DFT before the integrated rail plan? We feel we've lived with constant disappointment over the years. We should not be in fear of what's in the integrated rail plan, but we're not able to submit what we could to DFT to help them with the process. So it's the fact that we in Sheffield City region, if we don't, if they follow what the NIC has said, which is a regional 25 brief, we don't get any of this MPR. So it is this fear and it is this worry and it is the fact that people in society are pushing us to actually deliver this to government. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to echo what Peter was saying, from the left perspective, it is very much a concern of businesses to be playing a key role in the recovery and the levelling up agenda. And I think we ought to be stressing that, because quite often we don't feature the business view in this debate as harder, because businesses are looking for changes to happen so that the North does not get left behind and we do attract investment to the region.
Thank you very much. And Karen Shaw, please.
Chair, I couldn't sum it up any more eloquently than some colleagues on the board, really, except that I would add my voice. That I couldn't put it any more eloquently than Andy Burnham. We are the voice of the North, and we are democratically elected as well, and we need to be listened to, and we want government to listen to us and to what our communities are telling us. So that's all I have to add, really.
Thank you very much. Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm supportive of all of the comments here. I mean, pragmatically, though, we don't have an option, I don't think, other than to delay submitting the SOC for all of the reasons that you've said. However, I don't think that stops us by what we can be saying to government to say that we will accept a delay to putting our SOC in, but in the strongest possible terms, we need to articulate why we are very concerned at the fact that we are delaying it. And all the points around business support, academic support, public support, etc. And we actually be very robust in our articulation of that argument to government when we do say that we delay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And that was, of course, the original option 1.B in the first paper. Other Mark Roberts, please.
Thank you, Chair. And just succinctly to add my support for this, I think businesses across the North need to hear our ambition, and they need to have more certainty about future infrastructure plans so they can lead to their own investment decisions, which will lead to this virtuous cycle of increasing investment, which is what we want. And I would very much support your comments, Chair, about if the process is not able to submit the SOC, to actually have statutory advice submitted within a short time frame, for example, by March this year.
Thank you very much. Back to Steve Rotherham, please.
Thanks for the clarification, Chair. So it appears that our options are somewhat limited, and that is that even if we wanted to proceed with our SOC, which has taken an extraordinary amount of time and effort and resource to get to this stage where we believe that we're ready to submit, then without the co-agreement of the departments, then we can't submit it anyway. And so I think that's a huge disappointment, and I do think this is part of a recent and ongoing neutering of many of the things that we would like to do and believe that it is our responsibility on behalf of the voice of the North to do. So, Chair, if we can't change that, because that's the constitutional position, can we ensure then that our statutory advice clearly states that whatever the option that we finally agree on, that we won't accept a cheap and nasty option, or what the government call the minimum viable network option. That is not the way to do these things. It was my understanding that this SOC phase was about getting down to the final options, and that was the way in which we could influence the government's rollout of the IRP. It looks as if that's not going to be available to us, but we really need to put a very clear marker down that we're not just going to roll over and have our bellies tickled.
So I think the proposal from Barry is that we put down that marker with statutory advice. I personally will be very disappointed, if we don't complete the SOC within the shortest period of time. And you know, it depends, Steve, on the known unknown, to use a Donald Rumsfeld, the known unknown of the IRP. Are we going to be pleased with the IRP or disappointed with the IRP? If we're pleased with the IRP, we may actually be able to make some progress on those key corridors quite quickly. What I've suggested to Tim Wood and to Barry is that the team continues finishing the bits of the SOC that will remain the same irrespective of what happens on particular routes, and that having put in our statutory advice, we then see what the IRP is, and then as rapidly as possible we get the SOC finished and formally submitted. I'm going to come to Andy Burnham, and then I'm going to hand it back to Barry to make a particular proposal. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for seeking to come back in, but I think Steve has just outlined, I guess, the only option that's open to us really in these circumstances. It's not an ideal situation. I don't think anyone on the board is saying otherwise today. So statutory advice feels like it is the only realistic option open to us, John. Could I just then say, though, it needs to be very strong in saying, listing all of the things that are fundamentally unacceptable to this board. It can't be kind of caveated advice. I think it needs to be very robust and very clear. So, for instance, the Fiddler's Ferry option that Steve is talking about is totally unacceptable to Warrington and to the Liverpool City region. So that needs to be clearly said. In any circumstances, we would not accept that. Nor would we in Manchester either. To be honest, it's this is not transformational in any way, shape or form. Heading in the other direction, I'm sure Judith would support me in saying that Bradford has to be connected via Northern Powerhouse Rail. The city hit hardest by COVID, has some really, needs a real lift. That for me seems is just non-negotiable as well. Dan and I have our ambitions around Manchester Sheffield, and I know we've discussed things in the northeast as well around the line, the preferred route there. could we have a commitment, John, that we set out the non-negotiables from this board as part of that statutory advice, and that it is made public in advance of the IRP, so that the position of Transport for the North is set out explicitly, clearly, and beyond that, we continue to argue for a high ambition project. We already are beginning to be blamed. I think Hans has put this in the chat by some MPs as though we are the problem, and we're the delay. You know, we're causing the delay, and we can't agree. Well, we can agree, and I think it's really important that we don't just sit quietly. We need to at least set out the things that we would not accept in any circumstances. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Barry, back to you. Proposed way forward.
Thank you, John. So in terms of getting our thoughts in first, which is one of the first comments and has been a common theme throughout, I think the statutory advice that we're going to put in the preferred way forward, which we are looking at later this afternoon, can be put in very strong terms. Given the level of detail in that statutory advice would be private. But what I think we should look at is there a higher level of document that can be produced that doesn't get into the detailed specifics that would be more sensitive, to see whether that can be made public. I think we should be clear that we are on track to submit. Had the IRP not been delayed, we were on track to complete the SOC as planned, and I think the team deserve a huge amount of credit for that. I think Dan talked about the mandate for early progress. Dan, part of the advice we're proposing is to identify all those early wins where work can continue quickly and the next stage of development can be carried out now. And we think that's a crucial element of the advice going forward. So I think, John, what I'm saying is the detailed advice we come out this afternoon later this afternoon will need to be in private given the nature of it. But I think, as we did when we agreed the SOBC back in February 19, we did at that stage issue a higher level summary of our ambition that actually I think would be at a sufficient level. So I think that's something we should look to see if we can do, and I think that would hopefully tread that path between not breaching the confidentiality of detail but making the ambition clear.
Steve, your hand is still up. Is that historic hand or a current hand? Historic.
Yeah, okay. Apologies.
No apology needed. Just didn't want to miss you out. Look, we are running very, very short of time here, and we need to get to the guts of the NPR issue. So I think we need to bring this to a close now. The proposal in the supplementary paper was to reluctantly agree the option of delaying the SOC for the reasons that we've all said, but to issue statutory advice. And I'm picking up Steve's points, I'm picking up Andy's points. We need to move quickly here, given that we don't know what's happening with the IRP, but things may happen very quickly with a budget coming up. So I think we need to let the Chief Executive act on this to deliver the board's mandate. Can I have support of the board for that action as agreed in this meeting? Thank you very much. Thank you. Colleagues, we've got some more hands up, but we have one really important item to discuss, which is the preferred way forward. So I'm going to come to the members who want to speak, but please, we cannot reopen the debate we've just had. I think, Darren, you had a hand up.
I think that's a mistaken hand. I apologise.
Okay, no worries. Judith, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think we need reassurance that we'll all have a public statement that we can put out reflecting the really good discussion we've had this afternoon. Can we make sure that we've all got something that, because it's inevitable that there will be interest in the item, and I think we need to have a very clear, positive statement that we can put out.
So Barry will work on that, Judith, but you must allow me, I think, now to finish the rest of the meeting, because the rest of the meeting on NPR, the bit of the meeting that is confidential and needs to be confidential because of the nature of the content also affects what members will and won't be able to say in public. So we'll pick this point up as we proceed with the remainder of the meeting. Thank you very much, colleagues, and you'll obviously hear more from Barry shortly, and the strength of view is understood and reflected. Right, I am going to, in the interest of time, I'm afraid I'm going to have to... Sorry, somebody else?
Nick Bisson wanted to come in briefly. I don't know whether you've time to take the brief comment from Nick.
We really are up against it now, but Nick, of course, you're welcome to speak. Nick?
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'll be very, very brief. I was simply going to say that in terms of moving forward the programme, actually the most important thing for us, I think, is to get an SOC and IRP that are aligned. And I just wanted to say two things actually in response to, I think it was questions from Mayor Jarvis, which were about the ongoing engagement with government. I know, John, that is a case that you have been making clearly to ministers. It is one they have heard, and it is something they intend to make sure continues to happen through the rest of the IRP preparation. And indeed, Andrew Stevenson is hoping to hold further meetings with Northern leaders during the course of next week. And I think Dan also asked about the use of the NPR evidence base. Clearly, ministers made clear, the ultimate decisions here are ones that they are going to have to take. The NIC is one input to that. The advice from this board and the engagement with stakeholders are another. We already have the previous statutory advice that was agreed from the board, and obviously in that is embodied the analysis that has been done for NPR. So I think I can give some of the reassurances that Dan was looking for.
Thank you, Nick. That's a helpful contribution, and I'm sorry I missed your hand there just in trying to bring this item to conclusion. Colleagues, I am going to have to defer the corporate risk register because we need to spend time on item 9. Corporate risk register is hugely important. It's an important document, particularly at this moment for TFN. So can I encourage any board member who has any views on the corporate risk register to relay them to Ian Craven. But I'm now going to move to item 7, which is the exclusion of the press and the public under the Local Government Act 1972, section 100A2. This is an absolute exemption required by the department in order for us to discuss the confidential matters subsequently, and does not therefore require a board resolution. So I'm asking the executive please to switch off the live feed, and then we will proceed.